and start with us. You said you hadn't finished your message because I guess there is so much to say and people are so confused about all the taxonomies that are coming. So perhaps you can start by just summarizing what is really important for us to know today.
Thank you very much. I just give a very brief sort of summary of what's going on in the international discussion, especially G20, but let me expand a little bit. As many of you know, China launched this G20 Green Finance Study Group in 2016 when China was the presidency of G20. And that group continued for 3 years between 2016 and 2018. And in the previous 2 years, namely 2019 and 2020, it did not continue for various reasons. But this year, interestingly, Italy is now the presidency. And Italy being a European country, they're very interested in climate change related issues. And they came to us early this year saying that we want to reestablish the G20 Sustainable Finance Study Group and consider China and the US being the co-chairs. And China replied immediately by saying, yes, we'd like to do that. And the US thought about this for a couple of weeks, and then they said yes. So again, Governor Yi Gang appointed me as the co-chair of the G20 Sustainable Finance Study Group, as it was named early this year, working together with a US colleague from Treasury. And later on, this study group was upgraded to a working group. Being a working group, it's different in 2 ways. One is that it become a permanent establishment under G20, which means that not any single G20 presidency can decide to remove it. And secondly, it has the ability to make policy recommendations rather than just developing options for consideration. That's why this year we've been working fairly aggressively towards some important global consensus, especially on standards. Now let me talk about a couple of standards, including taxonomy and the reporting related standards. One big issue we're facing now is there are too many taxonomies in the world. I was hearing from ISO colleagues that there are 200 taxonomies already in the global system, which is equivalent to like 200 languages being spoken in the same community. Now that creates a lot of problems. So one is market segmentation. The second one is increase the transaction costs. For example, if you want to issue green bond in another country, you may get another verification in addition to your own, right? And thirdly, it may create a problem of greenwashing because some issuers may try to use a lower standard among the 200. So to address all of these issues, the G20 Sustainable Finance Study Group decided this year to push for a range of initiatives to improve the comparability, interoperability, and consistency of taxonomies. And specifically, we proposed the 6 principles for any jurisdictions to follow if they want to develop some taxonomy, and also encourage the use of a common taxonomy if a jurisdiction decided it's appropriate. And that's something we'll come back to with Eddie on, to what extent and how Hong Kong can utilize a common ground taxonomy. The second key issue discussed in the G20 is the increasing consistency of reporting standards. And I referred to the ISSB in my opening speech, International Sustainability Standard Board, which is endorsed this year by the G20 leaders. And what it means that instead of having too many different reporting standards, we are going to have a unified framework for reporting on sustainability-related issues. But G20 is also making a few requests to this new organization of ISSB. Number one, the governance structure of ISSB needs to be transparent and inclusive. Inclusive specifically means that we need to consider the situation of developing countries and small medium enterprises. And secondly, the coverage of the contents for reporting should gradually go beyond climate. Initially, it will be climate focused. I expect this to be coming out by end of next year, the first baseline standard to be produced by ISSB. But beyond that, we want to consider other issues such as nature, biodiversity, and social issues. And the third thing is really to take care of SMEs. The biggest obstacle to implementing the ISSB standard is tens of millions of SMEs find it's too complicated, it's too burdensome. Just to give you an example, if you want a SME to fill out a form of 50 pages, and this company simply say, I don't have the capacity, don't know what to do. I need to spend million to hire consultants, which could be more than my profits. What should I do? So that's something we need to really address by employing possibly digital technologies to substantially reduce the cost of reporting for the SMEs going forward. There's a common ground taxonomy, which I mentioned a couple of times, and now let me go into that a little bit more. It's created by the IPSF, International Platform for Sustainable Finance, which was launched by EU, China, and a couple of other jurisdictions back a little more than a year ago. And after 16 months of work, this working group, which is co-chaired by myself representing China and Marcel Hug representing EU, has just produced this first version of common ground taxonomy. It's essentially an overlapping portion of the Chinese taxonomy and European taxonomy. The first version included the 61 activities that are both recognized by China and EU. And I think it's already providing a good basis for some jurisdictions, including Hong Kong, to consider as a basis for its own taxonomy. Let me stop here for my first round.
But that's terrific, because what you're saying to us is that something will come within about a year. There'll be more agreements, and you're moving on to nature-based as the next. So actually, within a very short time, the whole world is moving very quickly along on this whole thinking. So in Hong Kong, Eddie, perhaps you can just let us know, fill us in of how we will follow the international development, which is also a part of the national development, because China is a partner in all of this. Eddie.
Thank you, Christine. Hong Kong is involved in two ways. One is, of course, actively participating in the various international initiatives, including the ones that Ma Jun has just talked about. The NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, IPSF, Hong Kong is a member of both. And we are also sitting on some of the standard setting bodies, which is also looking at climate risk, including IOSCO or Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. And importantly, both Ashley of SFC and I are also on the Financial Stability Board, which is kind of coordinating and overseeing regulators' actions on it. So our voice is on almost all of these international bodies. And we are also championing the regional initiative because of the connection that we have with the international global forums. So we are participating actively, and we want to give the Hong Kong Asian perspective into these areas. And as Ma Jun said, the two main areas where we need standards right now, one is common taxonomy, and second is disclosure. And this is also where the second part of our work is on how to implement the fast evolving international developments into the Hong Kong financial system. And here, like what the financial secretary just said, the SFC and the HKMA, we both believe that in Hong Kong, one, we have to have an internally consistent approach to climate risk to be followed by all the regulators. So if you are a financial institution, you don't have to face different requirements. And secondly, we have to plug in with the global developments, including taxonomy and disclosure. So we have established a cross-agency steering group last year. And earlier this year, we have committed on two things. One is that when the common ground taxonomy, which is done together by China and EU, when it's published, Hong Kong will start to adopt the common ground taxonomy, operationalize it with certain local adaptations. And this is something that we are already starting to work on. And in so doing, we hope that by adopting the common ground taxonomy, Hong Kong is already a place where many of the mainland green bond issuers come to tap the global capital. Hong Kong will continue to excel in this role. But of course, in doing that, we also have to bear in mind the need for this taxonomy to be interoperable with the other taxonomies that is being done around the world. And I hope that if there should be more jurisdictions using the common ground taxonomy as at least a starting basis, that will actually give rise to a more common framework that interoperability will be resolved. The other area that we are also focusing a lot on is on disclosure. The other commitment that we made, the cross-agency group has made, is that Hong Kong will mandate all its financial institutions to follow the TCFD disclosure framework by 2025. In fact, Hong Kong is the first Asian jurisdiction to mandate the financial institutions to do that by a date. So we're kind of going quite at the forefront of that. But this is more of that TCFD framework is more like the broad the parameters for institutions to follow. We still need the ISSB reporting standards that will be out next year. And we have also committed that we will, in Hong Kong, we will try to adopt the IFRS requirements as soon as practicable. And we're already starting to talk to people like the Financial Reporting Council or the Institute of Certified Accountants here to make a head start on how we can adopt as fast as possible the international standards.
Right. I mean, this puts a tremendous amount of pressure on talent because, in a way, in the financial world, all this is coming together at really quite a short time. And the world is also getting used to, after, I think, the recent COP26, that the world really, and industry, not just governments, are really moving in this direction. Can both of you comment a little bit about the demand for knowledge and talent?
Now, beyond green finance, let me talk about the carbon neutrality as the bigger subject that requires services. I was joking to some of the big four accounting firm that we need 100,000 consultants to help all participants in the system, including governments, corporates, financial institutions, to be prepared for carbon neutrality. Indeed, we're seeing lots of demand. In the Beijing-based Institute of Finance Sustainability, which I run, we have been helping, for example, Chongqing municipality to develop the carbon neutrality roadmap and the green finance roadmap. And after that, we got like 5 different regions requesting us to do the same thing. We simply cannot handle. Our team of like 10 people can do only a couple projects at the same time. So massive demand increase for capacity building. I think a couple of avenues for dealing with that. One is certainly we can recruit, paying higher salaries and bonuses and get global talents coming to mainland China and Hong Kong. And secondly, education is so important. I think we need to have a lot more university programs to develop specialized programs in green finance, in green development, in carbon neutrality, so that they can continuously produce the talents that we need. And thirdly, I think knowledge exchange across different markets, bringing the best practices from the world to where we need.
I think this must be it, because I think none of us have really long-standing experience like in other areas. So even at universities, professors who are dealing with all these issues are not necessarily practitioners, but we need the practitioners. So I think it's really important for us to somehow find a collaboration. And you've been doing some, right?
Yeah, we've recently set up a Center for Green and Sustainable Finance in Hong Kong. The aim is really to bring together the various stakeholders that you talk about, the practitioners, the green finance associations, the scientists from the government, the academia, to bring them together to solve the problem of 2 gaps that we identify in promoting green finance. One is talent, the other is data. Let me first talk about talent. What the center is now doing, apart from introducing the various training courses that is done in conjunction with the various organizations like the GFA or the World Bank International Finance Corporation, we are actually trying to find a more structured way to create the talent pipeline for Hong Kong. One is by training from the universities. The Hong Kong UST already has a program to do that, and we are hoping that there will be more universities participating in generating green finance professionals. The second area is the current practitioners. They need to be upskilled in their understanding of green and sustainable finance. Apart from the more ad hoc training courses, we are starting to work out a more structured certificate course together with the Hong Kong Institute of Bankers on green finance. We've already have one on fintech. The next one that we will be rolling out will be on green finance. So that's on the practitioners part. But of course, the third area is what Ma Jun talked about, bring in people. And that's what the financial secretary has mentioned, that in Hong Kong, the immigration scheme will be relaxed so that it's easier to bring in green finance professionals. So on the talent part, there's still a long way to go. And if you ask the market, they are really poaching from each other, some of them. The other thing I want to very briefly talk about is data. We have already just finished our climate risk stress testing for the banking system. One thing that we notice is that in terms of data accessibility and also data analytics, it's highly insufficient, not only in Hong Kong, but also globally. So that's the other area that we hope the Center for Green and Sustainable Finance will work on. How to access data, how to analyze them, how to use some of the technology like big data or machine learning technology to feed into not only the risk management, but also in future, how to assess the green impact of different green loans or green bonds, for example. It's something that is kind of new, but we're actually trying hard to crack the data gap.
No, this is a very exciting area where I think the professionals, the academics can really work together with the fintech and other technology innovators. Now we have 10 minutes left, and I think we should really dive in and talk a little bit about how Hong Kong is going to be able to serve the mainland market, which is huge. So perhaps Ma Jun, you can just update us today again on the size of this market, how you think Hong Kong can align ourselves and be prepared to serve the mainland market.
Sure. Let me mention a couple of points related to mainland and also Belt and Road. One is the size of Chinese market. As I just said, it's going to be 487 trillion for the coming 30 years. That's much bigger than the previous estimates. And a large part of that is green loans. So far, it's like 80–90% of the green finance in China, green loans. And the green loans have a problem, which is illiquid. They're not available to the international capital markets. And that's why I think converting them into ABS is hugely important to involve international money. And how do we do that? I think Hong Kong should really think hard about applying common ground taxonomy and picking the green loans from China that's consistent with common ground taxonomy and package them into ABS and CLOs and sell in international markets. The second idea is carbon neutrality requires a lot of technology. It's no longer entirely sort of mature technologies. I was hearing that half of the technologies for carbon neutrality are not yet mature, which means that there's so much money need to be devoted into PEs and VCs to support innovation in low carbon technology. And that's why I think this part of the financial market, which is equity related, needs to be developed much more aggressively than before. And that's the reason I was mentioning in my opening remarks, forming some sort of joint venture, PE and VC funds, and helping developing green technology to be applied in China. With a huge market, I think it's much easier to make money than smaller markets. The third idea is really on the Belt and Road. Even though the Chinese green finance demand number is huge, the Belt and Road is even bigger. Maybe not today, but in the coming 10 years, and so I think it become bigger as the majority of the renewables will have to be built in most of the developing countries rather than OECD countries. And also taking into account the fact that China has committed not to finance any new coal-fired power generation projects overseas, which means that much of the Chinese overseas financing that's made available will be for renewables in the developing countries, especially in Belt and Road region. That's why I think the implementation of the green investment principles involving more private and international capital in Belt and Road renewable projects and other green projects will be very important. And Hong Kong can also play a very important role in catalyzing such a consortiums for bringing international money to the Belt and Road region.
Well, let me add a few observations from our side. I think Marjorie is exactly right in that with the huge transition financing needs of China, Hong Kong is very well placed to be a platform for China to tap global capital because we use international standards here. People are used to the operating environment here. And we will be adopting the common ground taxonomy so that this part of the taxonomy is both acceptable to the Chinese issuers and also the European or global investors. And in fact, if you look at the green bond market in Hong Kong, it's been growing very fast. Last year, it was about 12 billion US dollar issuance, but just the first 6 months of this year, it's already surpassed that level. It's going to be double, I guess. And 60% of the issuers are actually from the mainland. And I believe this trend will continue. And as the financial secretary said earlier, just last month, we've got the Shenzhen municipal government issuing their first ever green bond offshore in Hong Kong in RMB. I think that will set a very good demonstration effect on the other local governments and also the mainland corporates to issue here, especially those from the Greater Bay Area. We're actually trying to talk to the mainland authorities to see whether there could be a kind of green channel for the mainland issuers to be easier to issue green bonds here. So I think that's a big area to tap. And the ABS market that Marjorie mentioned is also a very important area to tap as well. Another emerging area that we are starting to look at is the carbon trading market. It's developing very fast, both internationally and also on the mainland, with the mainland introducing the national ETS in Shanghai a while ago. And we have formed a working group together with the SFC and also the Hong Kong exchanges to look at how Hong Kong can position ourselves as a regional carbon trading hub, taking advantage of the connection with the Chinese market and also the connection with the international investors. We're hopeful that there will be some form of initial findings towards the end of this year, the beginning of next year. And I think Hong Kong is very well positioned to capture that changing market. But it's actually quite tough because the standards are not there yet. The standards that different carbon markets are using are different. So we're still figuring that out. But it's a potentially very profitable development area.
Well, maybe we can just we have a couple more minutes about carbon trading, because one of the confusion locally at Hong Kong is Hong Kong always says, well, we are too small to develop our own market. But actually what you're talking about is how Hong Kong can service or assist the growth of the mainland market. And is it that the mainland market, when it starts to trade, perhaps outside of China itself. So we're not talking about necessarily Hong Kong playing a role in the domestic market, or are we also talking about some role that Hong Kong can play in the development of the Chinese domestic market? Marjun?
I think Hong Kong can think about few options in playing its role in the carbon market. One is integrating with the Guangdong carbon market. Guangdong has a carbon market already. Out of the 7 regional markets, Guangdong market is the most dynamic and most liquid. And if some sort of integration into the Guangdong market can be agreed upon, then some of the Hong Kong carbon emitters, such as the power companies, can use the opt-in method to join the Guangdong market, which we can call the unified GBA market. Even though the total emission in Guangdong is quite limited, a standalone market may not be appropriate given liquidity is limited. The second idea is to create a channel through which international investors can participate in the Chinese carbon markets. And this is what I call the carbon connector mechanism. That's something we discussed last year. And we can either connect to the Guangdong market if it's ready, or we can connect later into the national market that's based in Shanghai. And the third idea is to develop a voluntary carbon market based in Hong Kong. As many of you know, there was a task force on voluntary carbon market initiated by Mark Carney, and now it's called Integrity Council of Voluntary Carbon Market. I'm actually sitting on the board of that council. And this council is producing a set of internationally recognized standards for voluntary carbon markets. And in the future, I think there'll be a few different voluntary carbon markets located in different time zones. And in Asia, we need 1 or 2. And I think Hong Kong definitely wants to catch this opportunity. This market is open to everyone, not just China, or in the region. It can attract all the suppliers. For example, the forestry carbon credit providers, they can come from everywhere and they sell their carbon credit in Hong Kong. And all companies committing to carbon neutrality, if they need to meet the commitments by buying carbon credit, they can come in to the voluntary carbon market in Hong Kong. So it can potentially become a very large one because the scope is unlimited for Hong Kong.
Well, maybe since we have 2 minutes left, I just want to press this issue a little bit because a lot of people are actually quite interested in it. The voluntary part of the market can obviously develop, but to go the next step, what kind of regulatory or policy thinking is necessary for Hong Kong to proceed along the road that Jun, that you've laid out?
Let me just say one word, and then I think it's a question really for Eddie and probably SFC. I think so far there's no regulatory arrangement yet. We need to develop such arrangement. My personal view is that we need to probably create a unit in SFC to regulate this proposed voluntary carbon market in Hong Kong.
Well, let me just add that the working group is actually looking at that because, as Jun said, it's a very new area. Even internationally, I think people are still discussing how best to think about market trading, especially cross-border. So it's a new one, but we're looking at both compliance carbon market and voluntary, and whether there should be certain regulatory requirement that will go along with it. It's a new area that we're looking at.
Well, but what I'm hearing from you, Eddie, is that you're on the path and you're going to spend a lot of time and resources thinking about how to do this. Well, this is the perfect time. I guess we can keep on talking for another hour, but this is the perfect time for us to thank you for spending time with us and for updating us on the global situation, the national situation, as well as what HKMA and the other regulators are doing in Hong Kong. So thank you, Green Finance Association, for this update, which is extremely useful, and I can't think of two better people who can brief us on the latest situation. So please join me in thanking the two panelists.